Hello and welcome to this lesson on witches. It is almost Halloween, so it's the perfect opportunity to talk about the witches in Macbeth. So what is the witch problem? Well, it's the idea that Shakespeare created the witch stereotype. We look at two quotations from the witches, we can see some very familiar ideas associated with witches that we still have today. So double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble. If perhaps we were pretending to be a witch for Halloween, we might say that. We might have seen that in books or in films. The quotation at the bottom, round about the cauldron go, in the poisoned entrails throw, and then it mentions a toad. So this idea that witches are standing around a cauldron, making potions, throwing in parts of reptiles, that we have got from Shakespeare. But he wasn't just coming up with this idea of witches out of nowhere. He was inspired to write about this by King James, who was king at the time. There he is. He wrote a book about witches called Demonology. Here is a quotation from the start of the book. He says, "The fears abounding at this time in this country of these detestable slaves of the devil, the witches or enchanters hath moved me, beloved reader, to dispatch in post this following treatise of mine." Okay, so why is Shakespeare inspired by James? Well, James paid his wages. So in Jacobean times, in the 17th century, poets, playwrights and so on were paid by rich people to write plays for them. Okay, so if you're writing a play for someone that's paying you, you're going to write something that they like or that flatters them. Okay, so it made sense that Shakespeare would include these idea of witches because that's obviously what James was interested in. So Shakespeare's response to the witches that has been created and has had a great impact on our culture. Now, that is what happens if you're a writer. If your ideas become popular, they affect the culture and people might absorb your ideas, for instance. It still happens today with TV and film and books. And Shakespeare's ideas have lasted for hundreds of years. And he's had an impact on the culture, and other writers have been inspired by him to write about witches, for example, or in their ideas of what they might write about when they write about witches. But what we want to know is, what did Shakespeare think? Well, on the surface, when we're thinking about what he thinks, we're thinking about his ideas on witches. On the surface, he seems to be pretty mainstream in terms of his thinking seems to be aligned with James, because he shows that witches have negative influence on men, and he shows that witches do not adhere to gender norms. So, for instance, Banquo notes their beards, for instance. I really like this description of their appearance as having beards, because actually it's a clever little nod to the fact that the actors playing them would have been men, because women weren't allowed to act on stage at the time. So this is a really good example of jokes, in-jokes with the audience that we perhaps wouldn't get today, because obviously we're much more progressive, and of course women are allowed to act on stage. But if we don't remember that women were played by men, we do lose those jokes. So it's important to remember that when watching a play or reading a play. We can think about, though, on the other hand, Shakespeare might have been being subversive. Now, if he's being subversive, which means to go against a figure in authority, he'd have to be very clever about it, because, like I said, James was paying his wages, and of course you didn't want to upset the king, because you could be accused of treason and become a victim of having a head chopped off, which no one wanted. So, what evidence have we got in the play to show he's subversive? subversive? Well, there's the evidence that Macbeth is the person who believes them, the witches, and he's shown to be a tragic hero with flaws. It's actually difficult to blame the witches entirely for his downfall, and you could argue that Shakespeare goes to great lengths to show that the blame is on Macbeth. It's quite clearly influenced by the witches and by his wife, but he has made those decisions, and then he becomes a homicidal maniac, prompted only by himself, really. So what else can we say to support the idea that Shakespeare was being subversive? Well, the witches start the play. Yes, that's right, 3 women start the play, and this gives them significance. If you put something or someone at the start of your book or of your play, of your poem, or nowadays your TV show or film, that can give them significance, that can place importance on them. And of course they do come up later in the play as well, so they are, their role is important, even though actually the responsibility does lie with Macbeth. The witches never get punished, if you think about it, and it's not a play focused on them. So what we can say is the play is not a direct reiteration of James's views on witches. Shakespeare could have written a play that was basically reinforcing the exact ideas in James's book Demonology, but he didn't, and that's important. And if he was really, if he really believed in witches and was really frightened of them, he may have done that. He may have made the play all about witches and made them much more responsible than they are. Okay, so we've got the definition of subvert there, and it means to undermine the power and authority of someone or a system, as I said before. So let's link this to the assessment objectives from AQA. So this is useful for upgrading your AO1, your abilities in AO1, so your ability to read, understand and respond to text. The exam board says that you should be able to maintain a critical style and develop an informed personal response, and you should be able to use textual references, including quotations, to support and illustrate interpretations. So this is all about your essay style and your ability to write an essay that argues a certain point and explains different interpretations. And then we have AO3. So that is where you show understanding of the relationships between texts and the context in which they were written. So that is your ability to link what's happening in the play to historical events at the time, important events at the time, anything Shakespeare might have been inspired by, the impact of the play on us as a modern audience, or any allusions to any other texts outside the play. So, for example, the Bible, and any religious references as well. It can include anything to do with gender relations too. So, even more practically, at the highest level, if relevant, you could argue throughout your response that Shakespeare was subverting cultural stereotypes of gender. So if you're looking for that grade 9, you want to create an argument throughout your essay. You want to follow this idea. It has to be relevant though. Don't write about gender if it is a question on ambition, for example, or on a downfall of a character. It has to be relevant, and has to be relevant to the extract. If there's not really much you can say about gender in that extract, then you can't argue it, and that's important as well, that you know to do that. More simply, though, if you get an extract from or link to the witches, then you could integrate the ideas here into your analysis of their dialogue or Macbeth's response to them. And finally, in your analyses, so your explanations, you can explain that the witches are interesting to a modern audience because prejudice still exists around women who do not adhere to binary ideas of gender. You could also add that the supernatural still appeals to a modern audience too. So I've now got 3 quotations that you could revise. There are lots more to find, but I've just picked these 3 for now. So fair is foul and foul is fair. That is said by the witches in Act 1, and it is repeated throughout the play. Macbeth says in Act 1, would they had stayed. That means I wish they had stayed when the witches vanish after giving him the prophecy. And then we have the prophecy there, O hail Macbeth, thou shalt be king. That is said by the witches, of course, to Macbeth himself. And that's the original prophecy. And that brings us to the end of the lesson. Thank you for listening, and see you next time. Bye.